Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to the UCCE Stanislaus County Master Gardener presentation on bats. Before we get started, just a reminder, we're going to record this event for promotional use, and we will be putting it on our YouTube channel later. You aren't going to be able to say much, so you can just type into the question and answer. And unfortunately, the chat is disabled, so we'll just ignore the rest. All right, moving on to the next slide. And I did not introduce myself. I'm Ann Shellman, the coordinator for the Master Gardener program. Go ahead to the next slide, Rachel.
Okay.
All right, a little bit about the Master Gardeners. In Stanislaus County and throughout the state, we extend research-based knowledge and information on home horticulture, pest management, and sustainable landscape practices. That's our motto. So if you're watching and you're not a Master Gardener and you want to learn more about the program, you can go to the UC Master Gardener website and look up your county and contact your local Master Gardeners for any questions you might have about pests or gardening, or if you are interested in becoming a Master Gardener.
Great. Okay.
Oh, and before we get started, I wanted to introduce our speaker, Rachael Long, who is an advisor in Yolo County and also Sacramento County, correct?
Yes, Yolo, Solano, Sacramento County.
Yolo, Solano, Sacramento. Yeah, and I had your little bio right here. Where did it go? Here we go. So Rachael is going to be talking today about the natural history of bats. And Rachael, how long have you been a farm advisor in these three counties?
For 30 years now.
For 30 years. That's amazing. So I bet you are really fun to hang out with and talk about all the different stories and experiences that you've had, which I'm sure you'll share with us along the way. So
absolutely. No secrets.
Oh, and so for those of you just joining us, if you have a question, feel free to type it in the Q&A, and we will be answering your questions at the very end. Also, for the person who asked if they could get a copy of this presentation, yes, we will have a PDF copy sent out to everybody afterwards.
Great. Good. Well, thank you, Ann. Then I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for organizing this program and inviting me to give a talk on bats, my absolute favorite topic. And welcome everybody. And it's great to be here. So, well, with Halloween approaching, we're seeing lots of images of bats, and they tend to be pretty scary. And I think that people are really scared of bats because we don't understand them, because they're so secretive. We don't see them. It's in the dark, and they're hidden. But bats are incredibly beneficial, and I'll talk about how they feed on insects, many of which are pests in our backyard gardens. And in some places in the world, particularly down in the desert Southwest, and in the tropical areas that in Central America, they feed on pollen and nectar and are very important pollinators of different plants. So through this talk, it'll be about maybe 30 minutes or so that I hope you'll come to love bats as much as I do. And so we'll have a chance to ask a lot of questions at the end, but I'll go ahead with the presentation. So what are bats? Well, bats are mammals like cats and dogs, and they're in the group order called Chiroptera, which literally means hand wing, and they're the only mammal that's capable of true flight. And if you take a look at their wings, you can see that little projection on the top is a thumb. I don't know if you can see that. And then there's 4 fingers right here. and it's surrounded by a membrane. And let me see, I've got I hope everybody can see this. This is my my bat skeleton. My favorite part about Halloween is that I get all these really wonderful just different bat toys. But anyway, so here's the thumb. And then there's the four fingers right there. And that membrane is actually just like skin. And you see all those little lines and ripples in there. Those are actually muscles, and they help the bat fly. You know, they can fly up to 60 miles an hour, up a mile high up in the air. And those little ripples there are just muscles that contract and expand the wing to enable flight. And the wing membrane is just like skin. I mean, they can feel heat and cold, and they do tear. Sometimes they'll heal, sometimes they won't. This particular bat is actually a fruit bat. We do not have these bats in North America. They're from mostly from the tropics and down in Southeast Asia, Africa, Australia. They have a wingspan of like 3 feet. They feed on fruit. But I just love this picture because it really does show that wing. And here's the skeleton of a bat. People say, well, bats are just flying rats, but they're clearly not. That they're actually more closely related to primates than they are to rats. And again, you could just see that the skeleton and the wings with the thumb and the four fingers that are connected by the membrane. And again, the only mammal that's capable of true flight. So this is a mother bat with her baby, and you can see the baby is called a pup, and they're born without any hair, so they're completely bald. And the mothers generally have one offspring a year. Sometimes they can have twins, but generally they just have one young a year. And you can see the mother is sort of tucked in a crevice, and the baby's against her belly. The maternal care is anywhere from several months to a year. Even like 2 years, you can see pairs of bats, a big one and a little one, all following each other. So some bats, depending on the species, that care could be quite a long time. And they live for anywhere between 20 and 30 years. Very, very long lived for such a small mammal. What I find extraordinary about bats is just their sensitivity to their environment. So here's a mother bat right in the center. Gosh, I wonder if I can, I don't know. Anyway, so the mother is right in the very center here. And then all these little heads right here, you can see the eye and the ear, those are all little bat babies. And this picture, I think, was taken in Bracken Cave. It's in Texas. That has like 20 million bats. And the mothers can actually find their own young in the dark and nurse and take care of their baby pups. And they know where in the cave they've left their baby. And then they know generally where it is in the dark. And then what they do is they actually they remember the smell. They mark their baby when it's born, and then they call out to the baby when they get in, and they go and they find their own, and they nurse their own young, which I think is extraordinary and shows the sensitivity that bats clearly have to in their world. And so the females and the young generally roost together, and then the males usually roost sort of independently, sometimes in very small groups or individually. So the mothers and the young are together, and they're in these colonies. Maternity colonies was what they're called. And then the males are bachelors, and they tend to be alone. And I chose this picture as a reminder that bats have sharp teeth. And so, never pick up a bat because they will bite in self-defense. They're predators. They feed on insects, and they've got real sharp teeth. And if ever I work with bats over the years, you'll see that I'm wearing gloves to avoid being bitten. And so just as a reminder, never pick up a bat ever with bare hands, because they will bite. And where are they living? Why don't we see bats very much? Well, during the day, they have what are called day roosts. And this is, they're active at night. And so during the day, they're tucked away in various little crevices and places, certainly in like rocky cliffs. Like in the upper left, you find a lot of bats in barns, tucked in these old, like, I don't know, like behind wooden doors or in little spaces and beams and such. They use old tree hollows. Bats will roost in these big old growth trees. And they'll roost under in bridges and expansion joints. Actually, the Yolo Causeway is a really wonderful place to look for bats. And actually, I'm holding a bat detector there, which I was going to grab right here. And that's this unit right here. And it takes these high echolocation frequencies. Like I could rub my fingers together, and I don't know if you guys can hear that right there. And so that I can actually listen for bats. So a really good place to see bats is the Yolo Causeway, and they have tours out there. Also, there's bat houses. I'll talk about that towards the end of my my program, and where you can put a bat house up, and then the bats are roosting in those expansion little slots. And that lower pictures, you can just see those little bats that are right there in that particular house. So in addition to the day roosts, we also have night roosts. And these are a little bit more challenging to kind of understand, because so during the day, bats are in their roosts and they're sleeping all day long. And at night they come out to feed, but they can't feed for 8 to 10 hours straight. They've got to rest at some point. So oftentimes they'll just find little nooks and crannies, like oftentimes on your porch or up in the window seams, and then they just hang out there to rest and digest their food for a couple of hours, and then they go off again and fly around and feed. And this is the time when the males and the females will come together and socialize. And what you're looking at here in the upper left is actually a bat at a night roost, and bats are pretty messy. So that's all their urine and guano. So it's oftentimes not very good to have them light on your house, because even when they go in and out of a bat house, they're urinating and defecating, and they can cause some pretty unsightly, stinky mess. The lower right is the bat guano. And that's the excrement, and it looks like mouse droppings. It's about the same size, but usually you'll see it in like little piles like this shown here. And like mouse droppings will be really slimy. Bat droppings, that it's all insect parts, insect exoskeleton. So it'll be kind of like sparkly or shiny. So bats have kind of shiny poop. Because it's all little insect parts that they can't digest. So that's what passes through their system. So sometimes you'll see like little droppings someplace, but you won't see any bats. And that's really an indication that you have one of these night roosts. So bats in our area are insectivorous. That is, they only feed on insects. This is one of my favorite bats. It's a pallid bat, and it's holding a big cricket in its mouth. And again, you can just see all the venation in its wings, and some of that is muscles, and some of that is, just veins, and again, it's just like skin. And so you can see the green cricket right there, and then the bat's 2 ears, and you can see its eye on the right-hand side of the cricket. And the pallid bats are kind of neat, because they actually sort of glean the best part out of the insect. So they don't eat the whole thing. They actually will eat the abdomen and then just discard the head and the legs. And so sometimes underneath a roost, you'll see lots of little insect parts, like, maybe a head of one of those potato bugs, or legs of a cricket. And that tells you that a pallid bat is living there. And so how do bats find their food and navigate and move around? And they do this by echolocation, where they're emitting a call from their nose and their mouth. And that call then bounces off objects and comes back to form pictures in their mind. So they're constantly echolocating to just to move around their world and also to find prey. What's pretty neat is that some insects, like particularly moths, that upper right one, actually they can emit signals that'll jam a bat sonar and confuse the bat. And they also have bat detectors on their wings. And so oftentimes when a bat is flying around and echolocating, these moths can actually detect the bats, and they'll fold their wings and they'll spiral out of control, and the bat will miss it. So sometimes what bats do is when they're hunting, is they'll actually shut off their sonar and then just go by sight. And so blind as a bat is a myth, but bats have pretty good eyesight, about, not like a hawk or an eagle that can see them like a mile away, but about like you and I do. What's kind of fun, and what a lot of people are sort of working on right now, is actually identifying bats by the frequency of the echolocation. So we have 25 species of bats in California. This is one of my favorite, again, is like this is a spotted bat on the lower left. I just love those colors, but there's also the red bats and hoary bats. And we can tell the species of bats by the frequency and the shape of their echolocations. Like a red bat is echolocating way up high, like 50 kilohertz, and a hoary bat on the lower right is echolocating much lower at 20 to 25 kilohertz. And our hearing is right about, we could probably hear the hoary bat sometimes at about 20 and lower. So these are frequencies that we can't hear at all. But there are devices that aren't too expensive that you can attach to your iPhone, like this ecometer, and it's basically it basically is taking echolocations of bats, and it's creating these graphs and then telling you what species of bats are flying around, and scientists use this a lot for monitoring bat activity and figuring out what species of bats are in the area for conservation purposes. So as I mentioned, bats have good eyesight, and they use it for hunting prey. This is a bat, you can just see it's just staring at that beetle, like hoping that it's going to pop up off the ground so that it can grab it. Bats also can hunt on the ground. This is a pallid bat, and it'll sometimes land on the ground and feed on scorpions, like this one right here, the pallid bat eating that scorpion, and as well as centipedes and also Jerusalem crickets. And it just amazes me, actually, these pallid bats, they're pretty common here in the Central Valley, and they're not bothered by a sting of an incredibly poisonous scorpion that we've done some mist netting, where you can capture some of these bats and look at them, and you sometimes spread their wings and you can see where they have scars where they've been stung by scorpions, but they don't die from these scorpion stings. So it's really truly amazing that they can survive a scorpion sting. In the desert Southwest, so up where we are in pretty much all of North America, going on up into Canada, Alaska, the bats are only feeding on insects, and many of which are pests. But down in the desert Southwest, and the more that you get into the tropics, like down towards Costa Rica, that there's bats that feed on pollen and nectar, and they're really important for pollinating a lot of different crops. And so in each of these pictures, you can just see that their faces are covered with pollen, that the yellow coloring right there, and even the one on the right with holding on to the banana in the wild. And what's really fun is that you can also find them coming to hummingbird feeders down in the desert Southwest. So people, for example, down in Tucson or further south are putting up hummingbird feeders, and they just, can't figure out why it gets drained overnight. And it's oftentimes because bats are coming in and feeding on that nectar. But and I'd love to see this, but we just don't have these bats here up in our area of Northern California. Bats will also feed on gosh, fruit, and the top one is just the one of the cactuses in the desert Southwest, and they're really important for seed dispersal, particularly in the tropical rainforest, where they're actually carrying plants and distributing or passing seeds throughout different areas. So they're really important for seed dispersal as well. And without bats, we would not have all these different products, because in the wild they're pollinating all these different plants. And without bats, we wouldn't have tequila, because bats are the sole pollinators of the agave plant. And so in the wild, they're very important for pollinating the agave plants for tequila production. And what was that video? The Batman.
Oh yeah, the
from
Batman
Mexico
of Mexico on PBS. It's basically how he kind of saved this one population of bats from harm, because people are afraid of bats and they were, not supporting them. And once they found out about tequila, that was all they needed to know. They weren't scared of bats anymore.
Right. Thank you, Anne. Yeah. So I watched parts of it and it was just excellent. So take a look at that. It's a really wonderful, wonderful program. So I just had to share the diversity of bats. So we don't have these in our area, but down in Costa Rica, you have frog-eating bats. And the bats can actually tell poisonous frogs and non-poisonous frogs just by their song. So the chirping that they know which one is poisonous and not poisonous, just by the sounds that the frogs make. Their singing tells them if they're okay to eat or not okay to eat. And you also have fish-eating bats. It's just amazing to me that you have all this diversity of bats. There's like 4,000 species of bats in the world. It's just absolutely incredible. You also have vampires. We don't have vampires here in North America. They are in Central and South America. And vampires do feed on, do take blood meals, essentially. And numbers have been increasing in part because of like more cattle ranching that's going on. And so there's just more sort of food that's easily available in these larger herds. And but they will, they make a little incision like on the hoof of a cow, and then get and when they have anticoagulant in their saliva, and when the blood comes out, then they feed on that. But we do not have these vampires up in our area. But I think perhaps that's what causes a lot of fear about bats, certainly in Mexico and Central and South America, is the vampire bats, because bats do carry rabies. I'll talk about that at the end. It's totally preventable, but they do carry rabies. I find what's so amazing about these vampire bats is I've seen a colony, and they use their wings like peg legs, and they can fold their wings in, and then they just can run like all around the cage right on their wings, and so they're incredibly agile. So as I mentioned, luckily we do not have any vampire bats in our area, and the bats only feed on insects. They don't feed on fruit, except for perhaps if you're in the desert Southwest. The types of bats that are pretty common in our area are the Mexican free-tailed bat, and I actually have, these bats look huge, but they're not that big. Let's see. I have one here that I'm just going to show, just because they look big. Here we go. I don't know if you can see that. Maybe I'll take a look. I have a hoary bat, which is one of my favorite ones. This one is a nice sized bat. But when the wings are all folded in, they're really not much bigger than a mouse. Here's Here's like a little brown bat, and their fur, oh gosh, their fur is so soft. I wish I could just pass this around, because it just is very soft. But this would be a big brown bat. And I'm just showing you those because mainly because for size. So when you look at this, it looks like, like a big dragon about to descend on you, but they're really tiny, about the size of a mouse once the wings are all folded. But it's a free-tailed bat because you can see that the tail membrane doesn't extend all the way to the end of the tail. So it's got a little free tail there. But these bats, they form very large colonies. You can see them emerge at the Capitol Bridge in Austin, Texas. Those black plumes are all bats, and these are people standing on the bridge. The Yolo Causeway, again, between Sacramento and Davis, is also a wonderful place to take a look at bats, and they do offer tours through the Vic Fazio Wildlife Refuge. And what I find is really fun is actually when bats are emerging from their roosts, it looks like a hailstorm. And so this is Doppler radar on the lower right, and that green is essentially just bats emerging from caves. And so this is Austin, Texas, right here in the center, and then those green circles are bats that are coming out of their caves. And so it really looks like a hailstorm. These are pallid bats, which we also have. I love their, just that creamy, buffy color and those their big ears. We also have the big brown bats. They tend to, just have like a sort of a dark face mask and dark wings. Also have some of the myotis, the little brown bats, and these Yuma bats, and western pipistrelles. So these are just bats, that we do commonly have here in California. And we also have the red bat and the hoary bat. And the red bat is really fun because it's the upper right, of course, and you can see it has a really long tail. And in the wintertime, when it's cold, it'll kind of roll itself up in a ball and wrap the tail around itself to keep warm. And these bats actually sometimes during if it's really cold in the wintertime, they'll go under leaf litter and kind of hunker down and try to stay warm under leaf litter and roll up in a little ball. And they tend to be pretty vulnerable for like winter burning of leaves and things like that. So it's good just to pay attention because you do sometimes find these in the leaf litter. The lower left is a hoary bat. They're also more of a forest bat, and these guys tend to roost more individually. You won't find them in like large colonies. And the hoary bat is interesting because it actually will migrate south as far as South America for to kind of chase the insect flights to make sure it has food year round. These guys really fly around a lot during the winter time. So bats are super interesting since they only feed on insects up in our area. They either migrate or they hibernate, and a lot of the bats in California actually migrate. And oftentimes the reason you hear about bats a lot in the fall is because they're migrating by the millions through our great Central Valley that we always hear of the ducks and the geese. We've got 7 million ducks and geese that show up in our valley. But bats are using the California Central Valley for a major migratory flyway as well. And going from Canada down through our area, all the way down to Southern California, down into Mexico, and even down into South America. And the migrations is just amazing. The bats we know use stars. They use landscapes to navigate, and we know that they use the Earth's magnetic field, just like birds do, when they migrate. And they always come back to where they were born, just like salmon. So they stay true to their roost, and that's why when you get bats and you don't want them, they're really hard to get rid of because they come back to where they were born every year. As I mentioned, some bats hibernate and they go into caves that have a really low constant temperature right above freezing, and they'll lower their body temperature right above freezing. The bat, that's a little bat hanging upside down from a rock. You can see its little pointy ears, and it's covered with ice. And so they lower their body temperature to right above freezing and just stay in that dormant or torpor state until the weather warms up and there's insects for them to feed on. One of the issues of these bats, unfortunately, is white nose syndrome, and this came in. Gosh, it seems like it's been maybe 10 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago, and it was brought into a cave from Europe. It's a cold fungus, and one that likes cold conditions, like 40-degree caves. And the fungus grows on the face of bats and on their wings, so any of the skin material. And bats don't like it. It itches, and so they wake up, and then they burn up that fat tissue, and so can't then survive the winter. So this has been really problematic for hibernating bats, and the graph on the right just shows the spread of this white nose syndrome fungus, and recently a find in California as well. But a lot of our bats are migratory, and so they're not as affected by it. It's bats that are hibernating because the fungus is active at about 40 degrees, and so that's when bats are hibernating. But bats that are not don't hibernate are not as affected. So just wanted to share a little bit about that. So I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about some research that I've done on bats and pest control. I've throughout my career, so I've been here, with the Cooperative Extension Farm Advisor for over 30 years. And one of my longtime interests has been on vegetating field edges. So this is a hedgerow on the lower right, and it's an elderberry plant, and it's planted next to a processing tomato field. And I'm always looking for planting native California flowering plants on farms as a way to enhance biodiversity on farmlands. So taking that top, the top bare field edge and planting it to vegetation, and looking for ways to attract in birds and butterflies and bees and ladybugs and such, and also bats for better pest control in adjacent crops. And the little picture of the owl reminds me that I need to share too, that owls don't prey on bats. Owls really are focused on rodents, and for the most part, bats are way too fast for owls. And so you occasionally will find a little bat skeleton in an owl pellet, but very rarely. So those aren't competitors or predators of the owls are not predators of bats for the most part. So the first step to sort of understand like this nature-based solution, how can we work with Mother Nature for to try to encourage more natural pest control methods such as bats, because encouraging bat activity on farms. And one way is certainly providing this habitat for bats, whether it's bat houses that I'll talk about in a little bit, or just habitat for them on farms where they can forage and roost. So the question is what are bats actually feeding on? And to tell what bats are feeding on, what you do is you actually just collect their guano or fecal pellets, because I mentioned earlier that bats cannot digest insect exoskeleton. So what passes through are legs and wings, antennae, little just different insect parts. And I mean, they're tiny. These, I don't know if, I guess I can't. I was going to try to share this, but they're very, very, very tiny. But you can look under a microscope and you can identify the insects that they're feeding on. So this is a farmer that I work with, and he had he put a board up on his, just his shop area, and then the bats were roosting there. And I collected guano from underneath that roost just to see what the bats were feeding on. That's their guano or fecal pellets, their poop, and found that they eat a lot of flies, mosquitoes, midges. That's good. We can't stand mosquitoes. Plant bugs like leafhoppers. Yeah, those are really problematic in gardens. Same with the cucumber beetles. They look like lady beetles, but they're green with black spots, and so the bats like those. And then their favorite food is actually moths. And so up to 70% of their diet. And moths, of course, are super problematic because you have, lots of insect pests that are moths, like, corn earworm, tomato fruit worm, leaf rollers, codling moth. They aren't eating any beneficial insects. Like, people always ask, well, are they eating beneficial insects? Well, bats are foraging at night. And many of our beneficial insects, like ladybugs, are active during the day, so they don't overlap there. And one thing is, though, they lacewings. They will feed on lacewings if they can catch them. Lacewings do fly at night. They're aphid feeders. That's on that lower part of the slide. That little green insect, that's a lacewing, and it feeds on aphids. But lacewings actually have bat detectors on their wing. And when they sense an echolocation, they'll drop to the ground and avoid predation. So basically, beneficial insects are not part of the bat diet. But moths are a huge part of their diet. So these are just some examples of pests that we all deal with that we just can't stand. And but with bats feeding on adult moths, it's preventing them from laying eggs, and so helping with pest control that way. So they're not landing on the ground and foraging around and looking for the little caterpillar worms, but they're eating the adults and adult moths, and then preventing that egg laying. So we did some work in walnut orchards to actually see what impact bats could have on helping to control pests. The thing about moths, when the bat eats a moth, it chews it up completely. And so you can't identify exactly what species of moth it is. The only way you can tell the species is by collecting the guano or fecal pellets from the bat and having it tested genetically. So there's repositories of gene repositories of different insects, including a lot of pests. And you can actually match the types of insects in the guano by doing a genetic test on that guano. There's labs that'll test it. And so what we did is we actually trapped bats. We set up nets. They're called mist nets. And very, very fine, so that bats, fine threads, so that bats can't detect it, and the bats would fly in there. And we'd take them out of the net, and then we'd put them in a little tiny cloth bag. And as soon as they defecated, then we collected the guano and let the bats go. So there's a picture of me with gloves on, and I'm just letting one of those bats go. And so what we found is that bats are feeding on these codling moth pests that are worms in orchards that do cause a lot of damage. And essentially, that the bats were providing $10 in pest control services in walnut orchards. So we know that they can have an impact on helping to control crop pests and with natural pest control by feeding on those adults and then preventing the egg laying and egg hatch and the worms from entering into the nets. So I wanted to finish with just a couple of things. How to attract bats to like farms for pest control, and we did a lot of work on putting up bat houses. I think we put up like 300 of them in different places to find out how to attract bats. And so I have this is a bat house right here. And the bats are roosting, and they go into these slots in the bottom of the house, which is really wonderful because they're self-cleaning. They're not like a barn owl box where you got to clean it out, but they're any guano or such will just fall right out, so you don't have to clean it. So a bat house like this will hold 200 bats. They'll pack in about 100 per square foot. So they're like a mouse. When they fold their wings, they can pack right in there. So they like morning shade and afternoon, or morning sun and afternoon shade. So they're mammals, and like dogs, cats, they love that morning sun just like I do, and afternoon shade. Mount them on structures like barns or shops. And in an area, where you don't want guano and their fecal pellets, it's great fertilizer, 10% nitrogen. Bat guano is fantastic fertilizer, slow release. But boy, when they go in and out of those houses, they urinate and defecate. We saw a picture earlier. And it stinks. Their urine is like ammonia. So make sure to choose a place where you're not going to be bothered by that bat guano. It's important to have them at least 10 feet off the ground, because when bats go into those houses, they actually drop down and then they shoot straight up like a rocket. So they go, they're going like down, and then they shoot straight up like a rocket. And then at the last minute, they flip upside down, and then they crawl in feet first into the houses. And so they need a lot of room for that maneuver. And if they're too close to the ground, they're really vulnerable to cats and that can, raccoons that can leap up and grab them. So that's why we put them high up, is because they need a lot of room. And those juvenile bats, I've watched bats go in those houses, and the juveniles, the young ones, it takes them like 6 or 7 tries. They drop down, they go up, they flip upside down, and they don't quite make it. They can't quite grab with their feet, and so they fall down. And so again, that's why you have them 10 feet off the ground. Within a quarter mile of water, open water, bats drink on the wing. You can see this bat, it's flying over water. It's got tiny, tiny feet, and they lap up the waters. They're flying by. They can't land, they just take off very easily. So it doesn't, I've seen bats use houses, miles from open water, but it helps them to have some water to big enough for them to fly over and drink on the wing. This is our son, and there was a barn that somebody took down that had a bat house on it, and it was full of bats. We tried moving the house to a nearby tree, and the bats never used it. Bats never use houses and trees. I just thought, well, maybe if I make it hanging over a branch, they'll use it, but they never did. So bat houses and trees never work. And it's because predators can go up and down the tree, like raccoons and cats, possums, and they'll feed on the bats as they're coming out of the house. So they will never use bat houses that are on trees. On poles work, but I find that after about 10 years, the bat house without any sort of protection from a barn or a structure, it just doesn't hold up real well and tends to blow over. So I prefer to put them up on a structure like a barn or a shop. Just wanted to finish up just a couple of things about rabies, that bats do carry rabies, and it's something to pay attention to. But it's rare or uncommon, I would say, that less than 1% of bats actually carry rabies, less than skunks and raccoons. Never pick up a bat with your bare hands. Once in a while, when bats are migrating, especially juveniles, they turn up in places where they shouldn't, especially the young males. The mortality rate of the juvenile males is really high. Gosh, it's what, 60 or 70%. And they just go places like, and rest where if they're really, really tired or thirsty after migrating 1,000 miles, you might see them out in the open. And the best thing is just to leave them alone, and they'll move on once they've rested. But if they're clearly in a place, where there's kids or where there's cats that can get to them, that's when you can step in, and if you have gloves or a broom and a dustpan, to put them up a little higher so they don't, so that nobody comes in contact with them. But never pick them up with bare hands. And it's also important to vaccinate your pets. That most rabies is from dog bites and unvaccinated animals. And then if you're bitten, of course, wash the area and get medical attention, and you can get, the rabies shots. And so since I work with bats, that I've actually had been vaccinated for rabies. And but it's, if you're not, then it's just important to go in and get the rabies shot. It's not those painful ones in your stomach. It's just right in your arm. And so rabies is completely preventable. But that said, don't put a bat house up where kids are playing or where you have unvaccinated animals. Really pay attention to that, because if you have 1,000 bats in a house, one might be carry rabies. And when they get rabies, they get paralyzed and they fall to the ground. And that's when they're vulnerable. But once the bat dies, the rabies dies within minutes. And so you're not going to get any rabies from a dead bat. Wind turbines are certainly one of the most, I think, harmful issues right now to bats. And they basically fly through when the turbines are moving, especially when they're migrating. They're not paying attention to wind turbines and these historic routes that they've and passes that they've always used. But the industry is well aware of the problem, and they actually are now monitoring when bats are migrating through, and they change the speed of when they turn on the wind turbines depending on the wind speed, and that's really helped to decrease any problems associated with mortality of bats due to wind turbines. But this is one of the greatest threat to bats behind the white nose syndrome. I get as many questions about how do I attract bats as how do I get rid of bats. And so I thought I'd just mention this as kind of the sort of the final couple of things. Do we still have a little time here? Yeah, okay. So if you have bats, the best way to know where they're getting in and out of a house, if you happen to have bats, is stand outside right in the evening and look and see if you can see where bats are flying in and out of the house. And right in the evening, right as it's getting dark, if you have bats in the house, they're going to fly out, unless it's a freezing, raining, cold night, and they're not going to come out, because then there's no insects to feed on. So they're going to stay inside, but they do have to come out at least every 3 days to feed and to drink some water. So on a warm night, stand outside and right as it's getting dark, and watch where the bats are coming out of the house. And then actually just put up some netting over that hole. Don't tape it all the way around. Use like this little bird netting, use wedding veil material, anything that provides a little bit of light, because bats need to see where to get out of their cave, where their roost is. So they need to see light in order to know how to get out. And so you sort of set up this like one-way valve where the bats can scoot out underneath this material, but they have wings, so they cannot like land and pick something up and crawl back in. And leave that up for about at least 10 days until they're all gone, and then plug up that hole. Don't use any of that spray sort of styrofoam stuff, because bats are very, very tenacious, and they go back to where they were born, and they will chew the styrofoam up and in order to get back into their roost. So use like a little piece of wood or something to block them. Some great resources for bats would be the Bat Conservation International, and also Northern California Bats. And this is with Corky Quirk, who runs a lot of programs at the Vic Fazio Wildlife Refuge, where you can go out and see bats. And this is a pallid bat carrying a centipede there. And Merlin Tuttle is a famous bat person that started Bat Conservation International, and he took a lot of these pictures. And I also write children's chapter books. This is the Black Rock Desert trilogy. I told my son these stories about a little bat and a little boy and a coyote that hunt poachers on a mountain range, and the bat is very clever. And through this high adventure story, you learn about bats, and any money that I make on the books always goes to Corky Quirk, the Bat Conservation or Northern California Bats Program. And another really amazing story is this book called An Immense World by Ed Yong. And it's really amazing how animals are communicating, and I hope that through this talk that I was able to sort of give you an idea of how bats perceive their world, and through echolocation, and Ed Yong talks a lot about bats and echolocation, but also about other ways that animals are sensing their world. It was really an amazing story. If you have a chance to read it, it's a great one. So with that, happy Halloween, everybody, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Your talk was absolutely riveting. I mean, I can't believe an hour just went by. It was so interesting. So my number one question is if you've met Merlin Tuttle before.
I have, yes.
Oh, that is so cool.
And he's worked with him on some of these projects, and he's extraordinary. And some of his photographs, I asked, I said, Merlin, how did you get the photograph of like the bat inside this flower? And he says, I just grabbed a bat by its hind the body. And he just said, I shoved it into the flower. And I'm like, oh my God.
He set the picture up. Yeah, I've heard him on a couple of podcasts, and he is just really interesting to listen to, and has
he's
so
a
many,
really
and his photos, I didn't realize until I started putting together a couple pictures for the blog post that went with the article written by one of our master gardeners, that, oh my gosh, every bat photo out there practically is taken by him.
Yeah, extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, we do have some great questions, so I've kind of grouped them up. There were two people who had a question about white nose fungus. So one, basically they wanted to know, is it lethal to the bats in most cases?
It's just lethal in the sense that it's very irritating when you're sleeping, and then this fungus is growing on you and it itches. And so what happens is that when they're dormant and they're sleeping, that they're conserving energy, and it causes them to wake up, and they burn more fat tissue, and so essentially they starve to death because they can't make it through the winter.
Oh, how sad. And you may have mentioned this, but I think people who are really into hiking in caves should clean their shoes off before they go from place to place. I don't know how many of us are spelunkers.
Yes, and just critically important to pay attention to that. And even bat researchers now that do work on bats, there's lots of protocol with being very careful, not wearing gloves, not when you're handling bats, and but definitely paying attention to not moving that fungus around, because that's how they figured it came into the US. It was first found in a cave that was very popular for visiting, and lots of came in somehow on people's shoes and spread from there.
And then one of our master gardeners asked if you knew about a promising solution about white nose fungus using common banana bacteria.
I'm not sure what the solutions are now. I think that what people are trying to do is really prevent it from spreading. But there's a lot of work going into trying to better understand how to limit the spread. And actually, I think that one of the reasons that in Europe you don't have any huge colonies of bats like we do here. I mean, we'll have the Mexican free-tailed bat that has 20 million bats, whereas in Europe the colonies tend to be much more separate and sort of individual, and they think it's something to do with helping to prevent the spread of the white nose syndrome. So my guess is that that the same thing is maybe going to happen here, but not for the migrating bats. I think they're going to be okay.
Great, thank you. And then Heather Johnson in Ventura wants to know what preys on bats. You did mention raccoons and cats.
Yeah,
And I guess not owls. Very
not so much
interesting.
owls, but hawks that can prey on bats and like falcons. So when bats are coming out of their roost, sometimes you'll see hawks that'll swoop in and actually grab bats. And I've seen also like bat houses up on poles. If the bat house is too short on a pole, like maybe it's only 12 inches. I've seen hawks actually fly out and just land on top of the house. And as the bats are coming out, they just reach down with their talons or their beak and they grab them. So hawks, I would say, sometimes snakes, but really I would say hawks and falcons are the biggest predators.
Wow. Everybody's looking for the easiest way to get a meal. It's like fast food, right? So just wait and it's delivered.
Exactly. Wait for them to come out and be.
Yeah. So Patricia did ask, can you mount a bat house on a pole if you don't have a structure like a house? I wasn't sure if you
Yeah, you can. What I have houses, bat houses on poles, like we have one on our ranch, and the bats are using it. It just after 20 years, I'm seeing that the poles are kind of, and the house is kind of getting weathered. So you may have to take it down and do a few repairs. Take it down during the winter time, not when there's bats in it, and do a few repairs. But you also want to make sure to put the bat house on a pole where it gets morning sun and afternoon shade if possible. So that's something to pay attention to. There apparently, like down in Texas where it stays a lot warmer all night long than here, that the bat houses on buildings, particularly where temperatures fluctuate, seem to retain temperature better than bat houses on poles and some others and their pups.
That makes a lot of sense.
For sort of houses on buildings that are where the temperature is a little more buffered, because the mothers they leave their pups at night, and so they might get cold if they're not, if it's just not the right temperature. But that said, I've got bat houses up on poles and the bats love it.
Awesome. All right. Another question that came up, a couple people asked was, so essentially, I think what they're thinking is if they have a bat house and they know that, there's going to be guano and all that sort of thing, can you contract any kind of illness like rabies or viruses or bacteria when handling guano?
No, the only thing, but what guano can carry is a fungus called histoplasmosis. It's a fungus that like valley fever.
Scary.
Yeah, but this one, there's never been a case recorded west of the Mississippi. So histoplasmosis is a fungus that is in the guano, but it's also in pigeon droppings. And so most people are resistant to it just through pigeon droppings. There's never been a case recorded west of the Mississippi. It causes flu-like symptoms. But that said, when I'm handling guano, I'll wear a mask. Or if you're in an enclosed area, I'd wear a mask just in case. But you're not going to get rabies or anything like that. But that histoplasmosis, it is a fungal disease that can cause flu-like symptoms. But as I say, it's very, very rare. It doesn't like this dry climate. But that said, I just would wear gloves and I'd wear a mask if I'm handling guano, like particularly if it's inside. Good question.
Nice. Yeah, and along with that, Jane is asking, is there any way to clean bat urine smells from the side of a house? And then it says enzymatic cleaners are effective against cat urine. So maybe she's wondering if that's sort of the same
I
thing.
think yeah, I think it would. Boy, bats really concentrate their urine, and it really stinks.
It's
Oh,
really strong, huh?
yeah, yeah, I would try some of those enzymatic cleaners. I think that should work.
Yeah, that Batman of Mexico, if you saw the scene where he goes into a cave and it's just like knee deep guano, and
Oh,
he's such a trooper, and then he looks up and he sees all these cockroaches on the wall and he's just like, okay, this is pushing my limits. So yeah, it takes a special person to work with bats. And so on behalf of everyone, thank you, Rachel, for having such a fantastic career and telling us all about it. We've still got more questions. Here is somebody who said, Pamela says, I live in an urban area where people use rat poison. I was advised not to put up a bat house because of the risk of poisoning bat young. That doesn't make sense if they eat insects and nectar. Can you comment?
Right, yeah, I agreed that the bats are only feeding on insects, and so they wouldn't be affected by the rodenticides. Certainly the owls would be, and because the owls are eating rodents that potentially could have fed on the rodenticides, but no, that wouldn't be a reason. That said, just in urban areas, just really pay attention to where you're putting up a box. I think we all need to look for ways to integrate wildlife, and also with living, and learn to respect wildlife. And it could be a really wonderful teaching tool to put up a bat house. But that said, that really pay attention to where that bat house is being put up. You don't want to put it up where you have unvaccinated animals and kids, that could find bats because of their curiosity. So people who ask me about putting up a house, that I always say, well, do you have kids or unvaccinated animals in the area? Because if you do, then don't put up a bat house. That it's better to have them out in the country or somewhere, where it's safe for the bats and safe for kids.
And Catherine in Stockton lives near the port of Stockton, so there's nearby water and plenty of mosquitoes and moths, even though she's in a residential neighborhood. What do you think, Rachel?
So I'm wondering if there could be somebody around the port of Stockton who would know of a structure out there where they'd be willing to put up a bat house. I'm just a little more reluctant about recommending it right in urban areas. Just because of kids. But that said, there's certainly places where they can be put up. But sometimes you can just ask like a neighboring farmer or rancher or an industrial area, and see whether somebody has a great place that's for bats and safe for people too.
Yeah, I think some people are a little bit discouraged because they've tried to have bats around. So one person did mention, oh, it was in a 40-foot pine tree. Okay, now I know why.
Yeah.
None of the bats ever used it.
Yeah, because they will never use them in trees. I tried, as I say, we put 300 houses out, some in trees, on poles, on barns, different colors, and never in trees. They never liked it. And even if the tree was dead and you're thinking, okay, it's a big pole. And so they just.
No, they're smart.
Yeah.
The more I hear, learn about them. Yeah, somebody lives near the coast and the nights are cold, so they weren't sure if bats are around there. So.
Oh, the bats are there. Yeah.
In fact, are there. So this person
just
needs to find Priscilla just needs to find the right place.
Yeah. And I would say that for on the coast, I would put the bat house on the south side of a structure where it gets plenty of sun. Here in the Central Valley, I put things, bat houses on the north side of the barns, because they're migratory. So bats show up about usually about April, and like swallows, and then they leave right at Halloween, right at November 1st or so. And so if they're there, in their area, mostly, during the summertime, then the north side that gets a little bit of sun in the morning is actually a perfect place. On the coast, I would put a bat house up on the south side of a building.
Okay, so most places the north side, but in the coast, the south side.
Yes. Mhm.
All right. And then speaking of them flying out and coming out of their nests, not nests,
The roost.
their boxes, their roost. See
Yeah.
how, yeah, we all have these things in our head that we learned as a kid. Liz said she read a storybook to her kids that portrays a mother bat carrying her baby, which was clinging to her
Mhm.
chest as she flew.
Yes. Mhm.
Is this true?
It is true. Yes.
Wow.
So sometimes, actually bat babies will fall out of the roost and, they didn't hold on well enough and the mothers will fly down and pick them up. And oftentimes by the nape of their neck when they're small, or they'll cling to their mother's belly. So that's very true.
Aw,
Yeah, that
sweet.
maternal care
Love it.
is really wonderful.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then another question from Becca is how far from their nests do bats fly at night to forage?
So if they have young, like they have pups, they'll go for about a mile away. But if they don't, they can go up to 30 miles away for food. So like in our area here in Yolo County near UC Davis, a lot of the bats in our area are actually going up to Lake Berryessa to feed on insects up there. So they can go up to 30 miles easily for food.
30 miles.
They can fly 60 miles an hour and they can go a mile up in the air. In Texas, they actually found that the bats were going about a mile up and feeding on flights of corn earworm that were coming up from Mexico. So,
Oh, nice.
so intercepting the big migratory flights of corn earworm.
And then I think I've heard that mother bats can eat like half their weight. I maybe have that wrong. But
Oh,
like,
yeah, exactly. They eat more than their body weight or more in insects every night. So that would be, like us eating like, 80 pounds or 100 pounds of pizza every night.
oh my gosh. Yeah, I went to the Yolo Wildlife Center a
Mhm.
couple years ago and listened in. So I guess I must have remembered some things, how you
Yeah,
hear all
body
this
weight.
information.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. I didn't share that they are eating their body weight or more. When they're lactating, feeding young, then
Wow.
they're eating more than their body
Yeah,
weight.
so that would be like a
Yeah.
pregnant woman
Mhm.
eating 80 pounds of pizza.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing how much they eat. They're voracious predators. Good to
All right, we
have.
still have a couple more questions.
Okay,
People are really interested in bats, which is exciting.
that's great.
Russ said he found a bat flying around in his garage in the middle of the day. That seemed unusual. What might have attracted the bat to the garage?
So it could be that the bat was already in there, that it found a nice quiet place to roost, and it was disturbed, and so then it was flying around. And the best thing to do is if a bat is in the house, just open up all the doors and windows, turn off all the lights, and let it fly out. So my guess is that it was somehow disturbed. We had a bat in our house one time. My husband, he just liked to dry his jeans out out in the garage. He was hanging it over a rafter, and about 4 a.m, he went to get dressed and grabbed his jeans and stuck his leg down the pants hole. The bat flew out the end.
Oh my gosh.
He disturbed it, and so we had a bat in the house. Of course, that wasn't good at 4 a.m, but we turned off all the lights, opened all the doors, and the bat flew out. So that's the best way to get rid of them if they happen to get in the house.
So to get rid, all righty. And then Heather wants to know about bat ears. Do they help them fly? What
Bat
are
ears are
these different sizes of bat ears that we see?
Yeah. That's a super great question. So bat ears are big to detect the echolocation. And so again, the ultrasound, the sound waves. So as they're navigating and moving around and feeding, that they're emitting these echolocation calls to find these different insects. But what's really interesting is that different bats feed on different insects, like the hoary bats really like moths. So they have, smaller ears, but other bats have bigger ears and they're feeding on different insects. So I suspect it has to do with like some of their feeding preferences. Big brown bats tend to feed on beetles. They really like beetles, like cucumbers.
Another question from Terry is that, all of us know bats are beneficial, but they do get a lot of bad press. Have you heard any news lately about bats and the connection to COVID-19?
Oh, there was some suggestion, that perhaps that COVID got here through these through bats, and I just you can't get COVID from a bat at all. It basically, they think it jumped to another, perhaps jumped to an intermediary animal and then jumped to people. So directly from a bat, you cannot get COVID. There was some sort of intermediary host and then another animal, and then it moved into people. But no, bats do have those types of viruses, COVID type viruses, but you cannot get COVID from a bat.
It's interesting too, because, primates tend to kind of, I guess, get, some of the same diseases, rabies and all these different things. So.
Yeah. I mean, they have those types of viruses. The bats do carry them, but you can't. It's like, there's different animals have all different types of viruses and such, and we don't get those, but possible that it came from the bat via an intermediary host that jumped to people, but directly from bats to us, no.
Right. Very, very good. And I was going to share my screen to show a book by A&R. If you can, well, that's not it. That's my meeting schedule. That didn't work.
I saw that bats, birds, and
yeah, I wanted to show folks that it is. It looks. It's a really. Oh, you did see it?
It came up. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let me do that again. I saw some other information for some reason. Okay, there it is. So I think it seems like you can, well, the UC IPM pest notes has information all about bats, and it does focus mostly on helping people remove bats or prevent bats or what should they do. But at the very end, it does mention that you can make bat boxes, and I think it has some links to things. But this is an actual book you can purchase. And it looks like you were an author on that book. Well, surprise, surprise. So this is available from the university. So if folks are master gardeners, they can get that through their local program. And then everyone else, you can order it here, or I'm sure you can find it at most local bookstores. And I was going to look to see if we had any more questions, because it's double check. We probably could be on here forever answering questions. Of course, it's not a terrible thing.
That would be fine.
Because bats are so fascinating. And now, of course, I can't find that screen. Let's see here.
Do I need to share the screen for you to see it? I don't think so.
No, it shouldn't be Q&A. It's like it's
okay, it looks like I think we've answered all the questions there. Well,
good. Maybe that was it. Okay. All right. So in closing, Rachel, thank you so much. I was sad to hear that you're retiring, but happy for you. And it sounds like you're going to be doing some really fantastic projects. And personally, I'm going to read all your books.
That's one thing that I'll continue on is my writing, and I have another book series that I'm about to publish as well.
And did you mention how people can get your book? It was from Story Publishing, you said?
TheMorrisStories.com. They are through Yorkshire Publishing as well. So
okay, great. Yeah, because the best time to start telling folks about bats and how great they are is when they're little, and as they get older. Before they pass through the stage of where they think bugs are disgusting, you gotta catch them while they still think bugs are cool.
Exactly, and certainly share that during Halloween that bats are not scary. And
yes,
that they're
absolutely,
and very beneficial, very good.
And there were tons of comments that said, great talk, wonderful information. I learned so much. This is fantastic. So again, and I love seeing all of those models. Can we see that bat skeleton again? Just
absolutely.
Seems like it would make a great closing. And it's I'm sure a replica, not a real bat skeleton.
Yeah, it is, but it's wonderful to pick these things up. But I just love that. Bats are not rats, and people keep on thinking they're just flying rats, but they're not. Look at, they're just more related to primates than they are to rats. So thank you, everybody, for
thank you so much. And we will be sending out the presentation, and this will be available on YouTube. So if you can't remember one of the fascinating facts, you can come back and watch it. So thanks, everyone.
Thank
And
you,
thanks again,
everybody.
Rachel.
You're welcome. It's nice to be here. Okay. Talk to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.